Hey guys, Argent here, with a Game of Thrones character profile of a minor character who barely appears in the show and barely appears in the books, yet is very important as he leads the most powerful house militarily speaking in Westeros. I'm speaking of Mace Tyrell, the father of Loras Tyrell, Garland Tyrell, Willis Tyrell, and what's her name again? The Queen. The character Natalie Dormer plays. Marjorie Tyrell, yes. Mace Tyrell is an unappreciated genius. People may call him an oaf, but he's an oaf who seems to have very keen political senses. What do I mean? Well, in the show we're always told that he's an oaf, he's stupid, he doesn't know what he's doing. And yet, his leadership of House Tyrell seems to, generally speaking, work out pretty good for him. Whether or not this is Alanna telling him what to do or not, I'm not sure. But even if she's telling him what to do, he has the choice to not listen to her. Part of being a good leader is surrounding yourself with people who give good advice. And if he just lets Alanna make all the decisions, then that indicates that he's a good judge of character and that he understands his own limits as a thinker. So I think he gets credit for that. So why do I say that Mace Tyrell is a genius? Well, let's look at his history. His first appearance in the Game of Thrones timeline comes during Robert's Rebellion. The Tyrells are one of the loyalist houses, along with House Martell and the Crown Lands. Aside from them, all the other houses are either neutral or pro-Robert during the rebellion. The Crown Lands, House Martell, and the Reach are about equal to the other houses. At least equal enough that they're capable of fighting them. However, despite having the largest army by far in Westeros, Mace Tyrell opts to not really do much. He goes and he defeats a Stormland army at, I forget what it's called. I'm sure someone would know what it was, but they win one battle in the southern half of the continent and chase back Robert's forces in the Stormland. I believe they won the battle because he let Brandel Tarley lead, and they outnumbered their opponents severely. So they won the one battle, and then they invade the Stormlands. But they don't really invade the Stormlands. Mace Tyrell takes his entire army and just goes and sits next to Storm's End. Yeah, he pretty much sits there with 60 to 80,000 guys outside of an impregnable castle and just waits. They don't try to storm Storm's End. I don't think you can storm Storm's End, just because of the way it's designed. He doesn't really try to detach some of his troops and send them north to help the Mad King. He just kind of sits there. And when asked about it, he's like, well, it's Robert's seat. I'm besieging the seat of the guy who's challenging the throne. If he loses this, it would be a big loss to his credibility. So I'm doing something productive. I'm loyal to the crown. Meanwhile, the main battle is being fought by Dornish and Crownlander troops further north. I forget if there were any loyalist lords in the other parts of the Seven Kingdoms, but the Battle of I forget what it was. The Battle of the Ruby Ford, where the main royalist army and the main rebel army clashed, was mainly staffed by Crownlanders and Dornish men, whereas the majority of the Reach's large army was seated outside of Storm's End. So why was this brilliant on Mace's part? Because he really didn't do anything. Had the Targaryens won, had Rhaegar beaten Robert in single combat, or just won a military victory and the rebels crushed, Mace Tyrell could have said, hey, I was loyal to the crown. I was covering your southern flank. I was besieging Storm's End. I'm loyal. So you should reward me. Besides, who else are you going to reward? Only 2 of the 7 kingdoms were loyal to you. So there's that. On the other hand, if Robert won, which he did, he could say, well, I had your back, Robert. I didn't really like the Mad King much. I just kind of sat outside and didn't really do anything. I didn't really kill anybody. There's not really much bad blood between us. Are you really going to go to the trouble of invading the Reach to remove me from power just because I was making good on an oath that I swore to my liege? And Robert, of course, was like, no, that's going to be way too much trouble. So while the Tyrells are excluded from power at the national level, they don't have any seats on the small council. They're left entirely intact. They lose virtually no soldiers during the Robert's Rebellion. They spend virtually none of their money. The Reach is not attacked or damaged in any way. And the Tyrells don't lose their position. They don't gain anything, but they don't really need to gain anything. They are the wealthiest and strongest of the 7 kingdoms. I guess the Lannisters technically have more money, but the Tyrells have more wealth production. The Tyrells have the rich gardens of the Reach that will supply them long after the Lannisters' cash runs dry. So all they really have to do is keep their forces intact and their resource base intact, and exploit opportunities as they come up. Mace Tyrell can afford to be reactive to some extent because of the strength of his position. He's strong enough that no one is just going to attack him unless he makes the first move. People will seek out his help, but to invade the Reach when you don't have to would be suicide. And so he has the useful ability of just waiting around, and if a good opportunity shows up to advance his house's interests, jump on it. And that's what happens with Renly. The War of 5 Kings breaks out. The Starks and Lannisters are in a war where they're pretty evenly matched. The Westerlands and Crownlands and the Riverlands and the North are pretty dead, even face-off. They have a similar number of troops. The Lannisters with their mercenaries have slightly more, but they basically have to bankrupt the realm and themselves to do it. They have to borrow a lot of money to hire mercenaries to match 2 kingdoms which have a larger combined army than they do. So Renly comes to Mace and says, well, you've been left out of national power, so I'm going to make your daughter queen. I'll marry her, but I want your support. Now Mace is thinking, well, this is good. So we have Renly's troops from the Stormlands, because he's the Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, and we have my troops. And our opponents are destroying each other, and they have expended all the resources, and they're nowhere near us. There's really nothing stopping us from just marching north and putting down and taking King's Landing and killing Joffrey and putting Renly on the throne, which is what Stannis tried to do. And if Renly had have lived, they could have easily marched on King's Landing and taken it down. Stannis was not a threat. He was irrelevant. So they could have taken him down. They could have gone and conquered King's Landing. And then the Starks and Lannisters would have had to... Well, there wasn't really anything they could do because neither side could really withdraw. So the Tyrells could just overrun their flanks. So they were in a great strategic position. What happened, though, was when Renly died, the Tyrells went to the Lannisters. Now, keep in mind, people will criticize Mace for making a power play, but he didn't lose any troops. He didn't really lose any money or resources in backing Renly. The whole thing didn't work out, but he still could marry his daughter off. They still had the deep coffers of Highgarden, and they still had the army. So he went to the Lannisters, realizing that they were probably going to win the war, and cut a deal with them, saying, look, we're the two most powerful houses in Westeros. We will support you here after the main fighting's done, because by the time the Tyrells showed up, the Westerlands and Riverlands had basically both been looted, sacked, and destroyed, and both armies had been extremely bloodied, with many of their lords taken down. And we'll join this war, but you have to give us a bunch of stuff, including my daughter becomes queen, one of my sons becomes a king's guard, and we get some positions on the council. So he basically makes a play for national power, and all he really has to do is send his fresh troops to help out in a war that's basically over, and that Tywin ends very soon through the Red Wedding, meaning the Tyrell soldiers really don't have to do much fighting at all. And just give some food to King's Landing, which is something the Reach produces anyway, so it doesn't really cost him anything extra. So Mace Tyrell, despite being an oaf, has managed to become one of the most powerful men in the Seven Kingdoms, probably the second most powerful man in the Seven Kingdoms, while expanding virtually no resources, either monetarily or in terms of manpower. He has succeeded in keeping his resources intact and his position fully intact, while most of his opponents and potential rivals have exhausted and destroyed one another. Ultimately, he will probably be a victim of treachery, and some of the houses of the Reach may overthrow him. But at the same time, he played the Game of Thrones well. They certainly came out better in the War of Five Kings than the Lannisters did, who really didn't gain much for their trouble, other than keeping a throne that they can't even hold in their own name. The Lannisters didn't gain anything. The Starks lost everything. The Tullys lost everything. The only two countries that really came out good from the War of Five Kings were the Tyrells and Dorne. And Dorne just kept what they had. The Tyrells were the only house that made net gains as a result of the War of Five Kings. They suffered some raids from the Ironborn, but I don't really think that was something Mace Tyrell could do much about. And now that the War of Five Kings is ended, he's free to recall the Red Wine Fleet and go and deal with the Ironborn, retake the Shield Islands, and protect his guys. So that is Mace Tyrell, the unappreciated genius and master of the Game of Thrones, who turns out doing better than Tywin does, despite the fact that Tywin is considered a genius and he's considered but an oaf. This is Argent Templar signing out.